as I posted on Sunday, we are in a very, very tricky situation. In April, it was reported that we lost about 20% of our GDP. This is incredibly worrying because we are potentially in a worldwide recession trying to get out of this COVID-19 hole. And now we have, as discussed yesterday, the Vote Leave are in power and are determined to get out of the EU and basically deliver upon what they see as their future for Britain, aka Britannia Unchained, a world and a Britain that will um, outsource and privatize everything it can because it sees the public sector as being completely inefficient. Then that also includes the NHS. It also includes ditching hundreds of thousands of regulations that protect people like you and me from corporations trying to cut corners and just make more money. This goes from food standards, consumer rights, and even environmental and welfare protections, as well as employment protections as well, because the preface to Britannia Unchained clearly states that the British worker is lazy because it is incentivized by the protections of the workers' regulations that there are in place, indicating what they very clearly want to get rid of. And I've said this years and years ago, and I've had Brexiteers saying that, oh no, that's not going to happen, that's not what they intend to do. We'll see. But what happens now is that we are completely unprepared, and to do so would plunge Britain over the edge in a time where it actually needs some sort of stability. It cannot afford to not have this extension. As I said yesterday, there was apparently rumours of MPs grouping together to try and stop this. Will it happen? As of yet, I don't know. As you can still see, it's the 15th when I'm still doing this. I like to record my videos in a bit of bulk. But yeah, will this happen? Who knows? Like I say, I may have done a video on it. I don't know. We'll have to see. But again, this comes from a guy called William Keegan, and it's basically lays out the entire thing that we aren't ready for this. Battered Britain is in no state to withstand a no-deal Brexit. My colleague Andrew Ronsley and I have both drawn attention to the catastrophe that could have occurred during the pandemic if supply lines had not been preserved through Britain's membership of the European single market. True, there was panic buying and there was some shortages, but the worst fears were not realised. This was almost certainly because there were none of the kind of bureaucratic hold-ups that would have occurred if we had already departed from the customs union and, more importantly, the single market. There were reports of a U-turn last Friday, thanks to the desperate pressure from the business world and an injection of common sense into the Cabinet Office, and the government is planning to relax border checks temporarily on goods entering the UK from the 1st of January 2021. Whether or not there is a no deal, yet although we are enjoying a period of grace, one sentiment still rings out loud and clear. The demented government is determined to leave the single market come what may. The negotiations are stalled. As long as the EU's long-suffering and intrepid negotiator Michel Barnier has said, in all areas the UK continues to backtrack on commitments undertaken in the political declaration. Why? The UK's chief negotiator, the stolid David Frost, recently made clear that in interesting on favouring sovereignty at the expense of the guaranteed economic damage, he is, to coin a phrase, only obeying orders. These orders come from the central control. As Brandon Donnelly, a veteran observer of the UK-Brussels relationship, says in the Federal Trust think tank, the July Bulletin, Brexit is the central and only one unifying goal of today's Conservative Party. A once great British party is now in the hands of the European Research Group, lords of prejudice but not much research. With one of its leading lights, Jacob Rees-Mogg, appointed leader of the House, Dronley warns, it is a fundamental categorical mistake to think that Johnson could ever be or even wish to emancipate himself from the ERG. The ERG is now the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party is the ERG. The 20.4% fall in GDP in April confirms that we are already in the worst depression in our history. Yet Johnson Johnson and the egregious Dominic Cummings and their cronies take the view that a no-deal Brexit would be lost in the continuing epidemic horrors of the pandemic. They laugh at the warnings of the head of the Confederation of British Industry, Caroline Fairbairn, that business already battered by a government-imposed clampdown is woefully unprepared for a no deal. They are impervious to the dramatic impact. They do not care. They see the sunny uplands ahead for global Britain. Unfortunately, given the US-led rise of protectionism and the breakdown of the post-war international order, these uplands lie in Aristotle's cloud cuckoo land. And here we are, with the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development forecasting something like a 12% drop in GDP this year, and every expert I know predicting carnage this autumn as decent companies crippled by lockdown fail and unemployment soars. I have every sympathy for those who argue that this ought to be a 1945 moment. We need vision from our leaders to deal with the most modern equivalent of William Beveridge's goals, as is stipulated by the title of his book, The Full Employment in a Free Society. Years of needless austerity, compounded by the social problems highlighted by the epidemic, have brought all manner of issues to the surface. Economists are generally agreed that there is such a thing as market failure, so certain that utilities and services are best provided by the public sector. But, as an economist, Amos Wilson points out in The Betrayal of the Liberal Economics, the problems which societies face are far more acute when markets actually work well, and they are when there is something which impedes their operation. Thus, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, full rein was given to market forces, with the result that the very rich are not only, in F. Scott Fitzgerald's phrase, different from you and me, they are obscenely so. And while at the other end of the scale there is much work to do for modern-day Beveridge still to do. Johnson is not a modern-day Beveridge. He is obsessed with pursuing a policy of self-harm for the British economy via Brexit, and to that end he has packed his cabinet full with fellow Brexiteers. And I've said this before, I am actually glad that the cabinet is full of Brexiteers, because there is no one else to blame when all this fails. They can't blame the Leavers, they can't blame the EU, it is all their fault. And despite how they might try and blame the EU for being so obstinate, when Michel Barnier has put it very clear, you are not sticking to the terms you agreed on. How can any government in the world, let alone the EU, do a deal or propose any trade agreement with a government that has said, okay, we'll stick to your deal, and then go, well, actually, even though we've signed this, we're going to do something completely different? This is the problem that the Brexiteer government have caused themselves. So desperate are they to Brexit, damn everyone else. And as my old friend David Gilmore, historian of Italy and keen student of cabinet history, says, all previous prime ministers, including Margaret Thatcher, selected talented people even when they disagreed with them. I cannot think of a Western European prime minister since Mussolini who surrounded himself with so many mediocritites. And I have to agree. But in a way, I've said I'm so happy that they're all there because there's no one else to blame. When they fail, and they will fail, Brexit has always been destined to fail, despite what they may believe. It was based on an ideological project that had no concrete policies ever. All these policies that they're going to unleash are of something completely different to Brexit because the EU stopped them from achieving their long-term plans of creating a complete free market society, one which they are obsessed with to almost a religious degree. This is why I've called them in the past free market fundamentalists. And we need to take that to heart. Because as they proceed down this path, everything that they continue to do will make life worse for you and me, and especially for the working people of this country who have suffered for years under needless austerity.